So good morning. As Zach mentioned, Pastor John's out, so a few of us have a chance to step up and play some new roles today. So I'll be sharing just some thoughts from you about the next few verses in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, 12 to 14, the verses I just read to you. And these are very familiar verses. These are some of the first ones that I learned as a kid reading in the Bible. And I want to talk about these two together. We often don't think about these two verses together. When I looked at several different versions of the Bible, I saw that in some cases, the people who put together a particular translation chose to put the section headers in different places. But regardless of how you're reading the Sermon on the Mount, as you're reading through this amazing set of teachings that Jesus has brought and that are really a cornerstone of his teachings to us in the Gospels, we're coming to a head. This series of teachings is now coming into the final stretch, and he's beginning to bring some thoughts together and summarize some things. And I would say that these two thoughts, these two teachings of the golden rule, of course the words golden rule don't appear in the passage, but that's what we all know it by, this idea that we are to treat other people the way we would want to be treated. And the teaching about the narrow way and the narrow gate. These two things are beginning to bring together this whole set of thoughts that Jesus has been bringing in the Sermon on the Mount together. And so these are summative. These are summarizing and bringing some key focus at a particular moment in this sermon in a way that's really helpful to us. One of these teachings, the golden rule, is an ethos. An ethos is just a fancy way of saying the way a group of people behaves based on their values and their beliefs. So what does this actually look like? He's given us lots of teachings. When we walk it out, what does it look like? So he's giving us this summary idea that if we treat other people the way we want to be treated, that ultimately that sums up the law and the prophets. And the other one is a warning that if we follow that ethos, if we follow the way of Jesus, that it's going to be hard and difficult and require sacrifice of us. The tone is a little bit different, right? One is an encouragement, one is a warning. And at first, these feel like two completely separate thoughts. But I want to play today with the idea that these two thoughts go together. They're together in this passage for a reason. That living out the golden rule is a critical part of walking the narrow road. So what does it look like in real life? Let's dig into the golden rule first. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So this, what Jesus is talking about, is love in action that's powered by grace. Love in action powered by grace. Now, if I were sitting on that hillside listening to Jesus teach all these things, he's covered a lot of ground, right? He's covered a lot. There's a lot here. We've been going at this since Easter, guys. We've been going since April. There's a lot that we've covered. We've covered a lot of ground. And there are a lot of teachings in this passage about how we human beings ought to treat one another. The Beatitudes are full of encouragements on how we should see and treat one another. He's talked about anger, right? That if you have anger in your heart towards someone, that's the same as murder in God's eyes. He's talked about lust. He's talked about forgiveness. He's talked about loving everyone, even our enemies, horror of horrors. Generosity, peacemaking, anxiety, humility, all these things that govern the ways that we are to act towards one another. And the question to me is, how do you remember all this stuff? Like, how do you remember this stuff, right? Here, Jesus is giving us a cheat sheet. Here's your, if I had to sum it all up in a line, all the laws and the law and the prophets come down to this. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. This is something that extends into every relationship that we have. People that are close to us, people that are far from us, our friends, our enemies, every relationship we have is governed by this rule. It is the capstone of Jesus' teaching. This is it. He's been building this amazing set of teachings, and this is now the capstone. In terms of how we relate to people, this is it. It's proactive. It's creative. I want you to think about that. It's asking us to engage our imaginations and put ourselves in the shoes of other people to understand how we might want to be treated if we were them. How can we have enough empathy towards someone to understand if I were in their shoes, this is the way I would want to be treated, and so I ought to treat them that way. It's sacrificial, and it seeks the good of others. It foreshadows what's often called the greatest commandment, right? So when Jesus comes to Jerusalem at the end of his ministry, we're going to see that he has these interactions with the Pharisees. We were watching The Chosen the other night, right, kids? And we saw this interaction with the Pharisees where they're trying to trip him up and ask him really hard questions. And they, knowing all these laws that fill their scriptures, want to put him on the spot and say, hey, if you just had to pick one, what's the one? And Jesus gives them two. He gives them a bonus, right? He says, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. And the second is like unto it, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. So this, months before that time is a foreshadowing of that teaching about the Great Commandment. And this is where it touches on our identity as a church here, the Gathering Church in Richmond, Texas. This is exactly what it means for us to share the transforming love of God with our family, friends, and neighbors. That's our church's vision statement. We are here to share the transforming love of God with our family, friends, and neighbors. And the golden rule is that love put into action. It's how we live it out in our homes, at work, in our neighborhoods. So I want us to engage in a little thought exercise here for a minute. If the golden rule is the hard way, the way that Jesus would have us do it, and it's countercultural, because it is, right? This is countercultural. This is not the way we as human beings normally show up. What would be, if this is Jesus, the summary of Jesus' moral code, what's the summary of the world's moral code? What's the contrast to the golden rule? Self. Do unto others as they deserve. Right? That's not the way we're supposed to be. Is it on me to decide how you deserve to be treated? That's not what Jesus is saying. Here's one that was my favorite as a kid. Do unto others before they do it to you. Prepositions are important. Right? That's not what Jesus is saying here. Do unto others what benefits you the most. Do good unto those who are in your group, your country club, your street, your political party, your whatever. Do good to those people, right? That's who we're concerned about. Your universe is too small. Jesus is saying, do unto others, all others, family, friends, neighbors, whether they look like you or not, whether they're part of your country club or not, whether they're part of your political party or not, whether they agree with you or not. This should make us pause, because often I live as if those other statements are the ethos that I should live by. So it was the simplest, one of the earliest teachings that I was taught as a child going to church, but it's still something that as an almost 50-year-old, I still have to be on the journey toward, right? I was thinking about this and thinking about different characters, people in history, and I remembered a quote. I went and looked it up. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I don't like that man, so I must get to know him better." I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. That is a golden rule posture. Instead of writing someone off or judging them from a distance, when we see someone who is doing something we don't understand, we think we disagree with, it's getting our back up, it's making us upset, our posture should be to lean in with curiosity, giving them the benefit of the doubt, and having the conversation. Ask a question. Don't make an accusation. Try to understand. That's the beginning of acting toward others the way you would want to be treated, because you know that someone's over there looking at you and not understanding you, and you wish, hey, if you have a problem with me, come talk to me about it. Ask me a question. Don't assume things. Don't assume, that whatever you want to assume. Live out the golden rule. So a few examples, I was thinking about this. I'll throw some out there for you to be thinking about. What does it mean to live the golden rule today? You probably have a bunch of examples too, but here are a few that I just wrote down, kind of to myself, but I'll let you listen in. Choosing to respond to a heated social media post with curiosity and kindness instead of sarcasm and personal attacks. Ouch. Offering to collaborate on a project with a colleague who has openly criticized you, seeking to understand their perspective. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? You can kind of see how this golden rule summarizes, or at least puts us on the right track toward following all the teachings Jesus has just given us over the past 2 chapters. Inviting a neighbor of a different religion or no religion to share a meal and tell their story. Standing alongside members of another racial or cultural group in your city when they face discrimination, using your voice to call for justice. Giving up a weekend to volunteer for a cause that benefits people you might never meet and who cannot repay you. These are ways of living toward our family, friends, and neighbors in a way that treats people the way we would want to be treated. All right, so if the golden rule is the ethos, the way that we are to live out our faith toward others, what kind of path does that put us on? Which brings us to the narrow gate. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So, these 2 gates, can you picture them in your mind's eye? The wide gate is easy, it's popular, but it leads to destruction. The narrow gate is hard. It is rare to see, but it ultimately leads to life. This is the way that Jesus lived out his life. He modeled this for us in his incarnation, humbling himself to come as a human being, to be among us, and facing rejection, intentionally following obediently to the cross, and ultimately through the resurrection. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a famous book called The Cost of Discipleship many years ago. And the whole book it's in the title, The Cost of Discipleship. He reminds us, when Christ calls a person, he bids him to come and die to ourselves. The narrow gate is costly because it requires us to sacrifice, to surrender our will, to put aside our preferences, to say, I'm going to do something that benefits someone else, even though what I really want is to do something that benefits me. Our rights, that's a little controversial, right? Our rights, but those are my rights. I want to hold on to my rights. Paul tells us that our rights are there to be given up for the sake of others. Even our reputation. Sometimes following the narrow path will cost you reputation with people that you might want to have a good reputation with. But, again, walking the narrow way is often the only way to truly share the transforming love of God with our family, friends, and neighbors. Because that love will take us through costly, countercultural choices that don't make sense to the world, but are life-giving in God's kingdom. So, I was thinking about this too, writing down some examples. You probably can come up with some examples for yourself, but I'll read you some of mine. Saying no to creative accounting or shady business deals that everyone else in your industry accepts as normal. When slandered by a coworker or a neighbor, you take the first step toward reconciliation instead of returning insult for insult. Remember that teaching about turning the other cheek John covered a few weeks ago? That is an example of the narrow way. Practicing costly hospitality, opening your home to a foster child or a refugee family, even though it disrupts your comfort, routines, and budgets, and even though your family and your friends may not understand it entirely. It's costly. Speaking out when your political party or your workplace or your friend group promotes injustice, even if it costs you belonging. Even if some of the people in that group are going to look at you funny and say, "What are you even talking about?" The narrow way. Holding Sabbath space when culture pushes us toward busyness. Turning down a lucrative side gig or a weekend overtime to guard time for worship, rest, and relationships. These are countercultural decisions. Continuing to give to those in need even when your own financial future feels insecure. And here's the connection between the golden rule and the narrow road. In human relationships, the golden rule is the shape of the narrow way. When we think about what the narrow way looks like when it comes to human relationships, what it looks like is the golden rule. Why do so few people walk it? Because it requires surrender. It requires sacrifice. It requires making hard choices. Here's one that gets me. The wide road says, I'm going to protect myself and what's mine. The narrow road says, I'm going to lay myself and what's mine down. I'm not going to live in fear, which drives me towards self-protection, or pride, which puts me in a posture of self-promotion. I'm going to live in humble confidence that if I follow this path of the golden rule that is very difficult to follow well, that God is going to take care of me. I can walk in humble confidence that God's way is a better way. There's another quote that I found. Thomas à Kempis, in The Imitation of Christ, he wrote, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." Ouch. I'll read that again. Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, which is what we all want to do, right? We just want to make others people, make them think the way we think, make them do what we do, make them be like us, and we get angry about it. But at the end of the day, we can't make ourselves any different without Christ, right? We can't just by force of will make ourselves better. I can't make myself as I wish to be. I'm still on a lifelong journey of becoming more Christ-like. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? And it is a long path of sanctification. So why would we expect to be able to make other people suddenly act in an amazing Christ-like way? Humility is the entry point to the narrow way. It begins with God reshaping us and not us reshaping everyone else. So, a little reflection as we head toward the application here. Which road do your habits reveal you are walking? If you give yourself an honest look, the habits, the ways that you habitually interact with the people around you, your family, friends, and neighbors, your friends and your enemies, all of them, what would it indicate to you about which path you're on? Are you on the wide path? Or are you on the narrow path? What do we do about this? How do we put this into practice? It's deeply practical, but here are a few ways that we can think about putting this into practice. Dallas Willard, years ago, said something that has always stuck with me, and that is training allows us to do what we cannot do by pure willpower alone. Most of us can't get up tomorrow morning and run a marathon without doing a lot of training, right? We can't just do it by willpower. We can't just decide that we're going to be a certain way and then it's true. We decide and then we organize our lives around habits and practices and disciplines that allow us to slowly move on a path toward being the kind of person who can do those things. So how do we do that? It's not about gritting our teeth and trying harder, but it's about arranging our life so that the Spirit can reshape us. And we do that in a few ways. We can surrender daily. It's a daily choice. It's a daily choice. We don't just make this choice once. We have to make it every day. Before your feet hit the floor, before you pick up that phone to scan the headlines, before whatever your normal morning routine is, surrender yourself to Christ. Reaffirm Christ's authority in your life and your willingness to live the golden rule. Let's get practical. Practice golden rule actions. Ask, what can I do this week to surprise someone, especially someone unlike me, with grace? What's a golden rule action? Put that on your radar. Like, who's someone around me that I am not treating the way I would want to be treated if I were them? Always be on the lookout for that person and figure out what's a way that I could surprise them with God's grace today by demonstrating this golden rule posture. Put it into practice. And then train for transformation. Build rhythms of prayer, scripture, empathy, and hidden service. Ask yourself, what is it that's keeping me from acting with a golden rule posture toward people in my life? A spiritual discipline, a rhythm, can be anything that breaks down a barrier between you and that. It might be getting a little more sleep, because it's really hard to act in a loving way toward your family, friends, and neighbors when you're always tired. It might be getting off social media for a while or forever, who knows? But dadgum, sometimes it's really hard to act lovingly toward your family, friends, and neighbors when all you see is black and white words on a page out of context, and we're not in real relationship with those people, able to ask a question, have a conversation, see an expression on a face. Maybe. I'm not saying that that's all bad, but if it is keeping you in your heart of hearts from having an attitude, from making the hard sacrificial choices to be on the narrow way of living out the golden rule toward your family, friends, and neighbors, then you ought to be thinking about that. I am. And then finally, persevere with joy. When it's hard, keep your eyes on Jesus and his promise of life. It's a long path. You're going to fail a lot when you set out to be this way, because it goes against our human nature. It goes against the ways that we are wired to be. It goes against the way that it's modeled for us by our culture, by the sitcoms we watch, by the neighbors we have conversations with, by the whatever media you consume. You are shown a different way than this. And persevering with joy is what it takes to lean into this and make it a lifestyle, a pattern, the way that you show up naturally, because you've been training yourself. You've been building this mindset, allowing Christ to transform you in the way that allows you to act toward your neighbors, your family, your friends, according to the golden rule. Let me close this in prayer today. Heavenly Father, Son, and Spirit, we know that your way is hard, but we also know that it leads to abundant life. I pray that you would reinforce in us, in our hearts and our spirits, that the golden rule is the way of life in the kingdom. That the cost of the narrow way and the narrow gate is worth it, because it's the way that you call us to. I pray that you would prompt in us an excitement about walking this path as a church family. I pray that you would reinforce in us this practical step, this practical mindset that is key to sharing the transforming love of God with our family, friends, and neighbors. Lord, you said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly, and we know that the road may be hard, but it leads to joy beyond measure. I pray that you would help us to commit to walking the narrow way of love that you've called us to. Amen.